tonight we're here celebrating curators, the unsung heroes of the art world. And I've assembled a panel of curators and artists that are part of the show. Most of them are, well, all of them are regional, some are local. I wanted to put the show together because of that fact. Since I had kind of taken over this space, I'm also a producing artist, and I always thought it was interesting kind of seeing the world from that side of art. Being a creator, being a maker, you're always concerned with your own work and making sure that you're getting that made, you're getting it out there, and you're saying what you want to say, and you want people to hear it, and then once you get it made, and once you find that show, or you get invited to be a part of a show, then you kind of send it out in the world, and there it is. Well, the person you're sending it to, or this panel, you're sending it to these curators, and they get your work, and then there's kind of this other interpretation that happens in that. I mean, you have your own context that you add to it, but then you give it to somebody else who's going to present it in maybe this other way, or they may see it in a different way, than maybe what you intended. And I always just kind of thought that was very kind of a curious process. So I don't know, I just thought it would be very interesting to get some curators together and to hear what they have to say about maybe modern practices in curation, how when they present work to the public, how they do that, and maybe even the why that they do that. They may be responding to something global, or they may just be responding to something local. But I think that it's a discussion I think that's really kind of worth having. Honestly, I don't know that I've ever been a part of a discussion like that, or have we talk about it maybe amongst ourselves, but I mean not in any kind of public way. So without further ado, before I leave, I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank our faculty from the PADUCAH School of Art and Design for attending. They're always very supportive of all the efforts that we do. So I'm going to hand it over to the panel now. We might start with Mr. Martin, and we'll just go that way.
Is this working? Thank you, Todd. I'm T. Michael Martin. I go by Mike or Michael. It can be a little confusing sometimes. I'm the director of University Galleries at Murray State University. Before that, I was an exhibition coordinator for the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So that just gives you a little background. And also, I'm an artist. That's why I'm here tonight.
My name is Katie Boatman, coming here from Nashville, Tennessee, specifically Belmont University, where I am a full-time lecturer and director of galleries on campus. I'm an artist as well, and I also teach part-time.
I love that part.
Hello, thanks Todd again for having us and inviting me to be part of the show. My name is Stacy Reason. I am currently the executive director of the Iser Art Center here in Paducah, downtown Paducah. I think that is mostly all that I do right now, besides make art and just exist in this fine line of a world between artist and curator.
Thanks, Todd. And my name is Debbie Henry Danielson. I'm with the Murray Art Guild in Murray.
I'm Christina Arnold. I'm from Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And I'm our gallery director there. I actually have 2 galleries that I facilitate and I teach. So I think a lot of us also teach. I teach at the foundations level, and I've now developed 2 courses, one in installation art and one actually in gallery studies, which is a practicum. What do we do now?
What do you want to talk about?
Well, and one thing I forgot to mention is that we are entertaining questions from the audience. If there's a question about curation that's on your mind, or if all of a sudden like a spark has happened, and you like, oh yeah, well, like how do you choose shows? Like when you're planning out a season of shows, like how seasons or or like years, semesters for those in academic circles. It's like I'm sure each of you have like a different process, especially those that are in the community as opposed to university setting. So maybe that's a good place to start. Like back to Mr. Martin. Like
That's
how do
me.
you what's your process kind of?
Well, I was once asked what my curatorial agenda was, and I didn't really like that as a question because the term seemed a bit negative to me. I have to be more open to the needs of students and the community and that ever-changing nature, plus all of the areas of emphasis that we have at Murray State. There's like 10 different areas, and it's hard to cater to all of those areas each semester or even within a year. But I do tend to be at least a year and a half out with some flexibility in the scheduling. I usually each semester there's 5 to 7 shows that either originate from me or that I commandeer along the way that are traveling shows that I find have some sort of educational importance for the students. And then there's a good 10 to 14 student shows on top of those that we do.
Right.
So I have multiple galleries. I guess there's 4, and then sometimes I commandeer additional space on campus. But around over 8,000 square feet of exhibition space there at Murray State. So I schedule it that far in advance so that I can stay on top of it, and keep files and folders for everything that's going on. Just helps me stay organized.
We operate on the same type of scheduling. I keep a year and a half booked out, and then I'm constantly accepting exhibition proposals from any artists interested in exhibiting in our spaces. Around February or March, there's a selection process where I'm specifically soliciting exhibition ideas from faculty as a way of enriching our curriculum, which is the primary importance of our gallery spaces, to engage our students with practicing artists that are not only well-established but also emerging themselves. So we have 2 gallery spaces, 2 main gallery spaces. The Lou Art Gallery, which is a larger, roughly 2,700 square foot space. And that one is reserved for my more extensive curatorial experiences and professional artists that are more well-established, and also traveling exhibitions that engage not only our art students but the rest of campus as well. I try to be as inclusive of other disciplines as possible. Within Gallery 121, it's a little bit of a smaller space, roughly 1,000 square feet, and that particular space sees about 12 exhibitions rotating in and out of it a year. We're looking at more emerging artists as well as our own students, and then even high school and middle school students within the region of Middle Tennessee. It's exciting.
Gosh, that was dramatic.
I'm just leaning in.
I know. Well, I've got someone on board that's taking up all my space. So
Extra strength.
Yeah. So I liked how you start with someone asking you about your agenda.
Curatorial
Oh my
agenda.
gosh, that's such a loaded
Yes.
question.
That was tough.
Pressure, But I think that in booking the shows, my personal, professional, kind of curatorial practice focuses or takes into account that relationship between artist and curator, and then curator and gallery and public, all those different relationships. And I, being an artist and being a studio-trained artist foremost, that I think about the artist's role in creating the show. So I take a very active role as a curator, almost as a partnering artist. So that is a relatively new, relatively as in the last 20 or 30 years, new practice in the curatorial field. Before a curator was this person that took care of an artwork, of presenting it, and there was not a lot of focus or attention on the interpretation side of the curator. They put together an exhibition in order to present fact or medium or artist or something, and now it's a much more active role. So, you know, being sensitive to that role, and at what point I can, you know, appropriately manipulate the artwork to show a certain way that I can almost participate in the artwork's interpretation or presentation is something that I'm really interested in, and I think that you know, so far it's worked out well. I haven't ruffled too many feathers, but there's definitely that kind of fine line between, you know, when are you overstepping your boundary as a curator and just taking their artwork and you know, reframing it in a way that it changes it. But to me, I'm really interested in that kind of fine line between artist and curator. Just a little bit about the Iser. We have 7 major exhibitions a year, 4 of which are annual shows, so we really only have 3 that I book. That's a nice schedule to work with because it takes a lot of pressure off of me, but it's also, you know, a little bit hard to have a lot of, you know, room to play around. The shows that we have, the 4 shows that we have are all group shows, so there's a ton of diversity as far as medium and content and kinds of artists that show. But so the 3 shows that I book are generally 1 or 2 person shows, and they're much more of these kind of project shows or installation kind of projects. So it's fun to work with.
My turn.
Yeah.
So the Art Guild, I mean, it's different than an academic situation in that it is a community-based organization. So my primary concern, or where the exhibits come from, is not only the artist community, but the community at large. And I see my role as being a facilitator between the artist and the community. We have an 11-month exhibition schedule. Some of that is locked in with a members exhibit, 2 student exhibits, and then the rest of it comes from either solo exhibits or small group exhibits. It is a small gallery. We stay booked about a year to a year and 3 months out. It's kind of a space that's been really good because it's not too big, so it works really well for small exhibits, and it's very accessible for the community. And like that's coming back to what my main concern was, exhibits that are accessible to the community, but also might push their ideas of things that they might not have seen otherwise.
Thinking about, I think about audience a lot, and it sounds like we all do, and we all think about who our primary audience is, who secondary audiences might be. Those of us on campuses, I think our students are, you know, kind of our primary focus of an audience. Our galleries are in the middle of what's called the Fine Arts Center, but we have modern languages, we have anthropology, communication, music, art, so there's multiple disciplines in our building, and part of that, I feel like we have a lot of real estate, although it's interesting to hear you all. I mean, usually you talk about a gallery in terms of square footage, but our galleries are very linear. Like one is literally a corridor that was turned, like it was a dark, scary, kind of sticky hallway that they turned into a gallery, like Kroger, you know, the meat section. But it's actually, it's a really awesome way it's got high traffic, it's open whenever the buildings are open, we get tons of people. And then the main gallery, everyone's like, well, wow, this is a great converted stairwell. It's like, no, actually the stairway was built as part of the original architectural element. So I look at this gallery and you think about, okay, how do you display sculpture in a space like this? How do you display video? How do you display installation? The ceilings are crazy. They're even crazier than our ceilings. So I think about space a lot. I think about accessibility a lot. That's another thing. We're not ADA compliant because we don't have to be, because we were built in 1969, and as long as you don't renovate a building, apparently, you don't actually have to bring it up to every code. So if somebody heard that makes us get more money, that would be awesome.
I'm in that situation too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And our walls are covered in carpet. So there was a carpet salesperson going around in like 1975. There's a lot of actually galleries in this area that have that kind of, it's self-healing. So this is not answering the question of how far out do I schedule. I try and keep a balance between being organized and being flexible, which is probably the hardest, seesaw to balance. And with those 2 galleries, the main one is scheduled usually like a year plus. We have some shows that we schedule 3 years out, and so that's pretty hard and fast scheduled all the time. The corridor gallery is a more flexible one. The problem with just bringing anything into that, again, is audience, because it's a K through 92, you know, or however, it's like everybody goes through that hallway. We have children's violin lessons on the 3rd floor. The kids don't care if they see naked people, but the kids' parents sometimes freak out. So we have sort of a loose, I'm going to say, we have a loose no penis policy in that hall. It's a biological body part, so I can say it. But again, so people, and the other main set of folks I'm trying to engage are other faculty and other disciplines. And that's been pretty successful. The hardest set of folks to engage is actually the community. And I think it's because we're landlocked. It's really difficult to park, which sounds like the world's stupidest reason not to be able to reach out to people. But if they can't find you and they can't get to you, it doesn't matter how many breadcrumbs you leave. We've literally tried like driving a van downtown to the square we have an art hop, and like shoving people into the van and bringing them back up the hill. And they're great with that for a night, but they don't come back. Probably not because we kidnapped them. Okay, next.
So we juggle a lot, actually. I mean, between teaching, I also teach, I didn't mention that, but between teaching, trying to figure out what audience we're dedicated to versus also reaching out to others.
And I think that was a good point too about the audience isn't just an adult audience, but in the community center, you know, certainly want to have shows that support the artist community, but in the community at large. We teach youth workshops, there's kids through all the time. So you are trying, and we also use the gallery as a teaching tool. So the workshops that we have, it's great to be able to have the gallery on site so that we can take the kids from the workshop up to see that. So it plays an important role like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always referring to the galleries as an extension of the university's classroom, but pretty much any classroom for that matter. So, I mean, a laboratory for learning more things with objects in front of you. So, I don't know, I try my best to sort of get these diverse and dynamic exhibitions so that it can engage a broad audience. Yeah, not really limiting, trying to be as inclusive as possible in those scenarios.
That was a nice Hans Oberist reference there to the gallery as a laboratory.
That's right, it's a laboratory.
But I mean, honestly, I call it the lab. I call it we do research. I mean, partly because we're competing with STEM, and I would like to say we're collaborating with STEM. Often it feels like we're competing with STEM, especially we cannot get away from the political climate. So I think that sometimes, as much as we can, align ourselves and show people, okay, we are like these other disciplines, and just use the language. I mean, language. Like we were talking about, everybody's even called C. Todd, C. Christina, you know, C. Debbie. Like language has a way of defining how we think, and so if we usurp and use the language from the disciplines that have lots of money, hopefully, like, and that's one of the. And I was thinking about challenges on the way here, and I had a 2.5-hour drive, so I was thinking a lot. But I think it's relevancy and being taken seriously, and I think that we're beating our head against that wall. Our students, I think, they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They understand that this is important. I'm very lucky that we have really supportive administration. But once you get past like our university president and out into kind of the business community, out into like, we're having to do some serious work in terms of
Changing on the state level every day.
It is.
I could add on that. One challenge that I experienced, I'm going into my 4th year at Belmont University, and we are a private institution. Not only are we a private institution, but we are a Christian facility. So there are some pretty strict guidelines, particularly in terms of censorship and naked versus nude, that draw a fine line that is absolutely unable for me to cross. And I've tried very hard to integrate our gallery programming into a more 21st century, trying to actually incorporate time-based media. It's been a challenge because we have no TVs to work with. We have very little projection systems, but I'm moving forward there. That is definitely one of the most challenging things to deal with. All of my exhibition programming has to go through not only my college administration, but the university as a whole. The president is approving our exhibition schedule on an annual basis.
Oh. It's a little too much micromanaging.
Yes, you're telling me.
And can slow the process down.
It does.
I mean, if I could be scheduled out further for some shows and then have more room for experimentation in other spaces, I would. I also run on the staff of myself and student workers and a part-time facilitator there within the department. So it would be great to have like all this extra resources, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way about just an unlimited amount of engagement and opportunities and different, I mean, just time-based media alone would be
Right.
for you.
And that stigma of being a Christian university, I think in some ways does detour our connection with the community because they see us through a filtered lens, and it's hard to get them to come in, which is why I go out to all those art crawls and spread the word.
Do we have an audience question?
Yeah.
From a friend?
If there's not, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested in, well, so I noticed, I want to pull a few things. Like, I noticed that a number of you used the word also, and you talked about juggling these different tasks that you have. And I'm kind of curious, but perhaps on the other end, we have you talking about sort of a kind of ideal synthesis of your perhaps artistic, creative side and the curatorial as also kind of as a creative practice in a way, which is more or less limited, I'm sure, depending on the nature of the show. But I'm kind of curious. I mean, I'm also for those of you as in university settings, I also teach at a state regional university where there's lots of pressure, there's lots of limited resources. There's probably for some of you demands to be doing this and also this and also this. So I'm curious about your maybe like critique of that as a state of things, especially at smaller, regional universities with less resources. But then on the other hand, if there's times when, like the teaching, the curatorial practice, your own art practice feel like substantially enhanced, if that's something that's difficult and annoying at times, but also enhances these parts of your careers.
Well, I'll just step in really quick with all of the demands and all of these being pulled in all these different ways. It does limit time for research, and I want to say maybe the ability to really dive into curation the way it needs to be, to actually be with the artist and be with the work, get the background. So sometimes you don't get as enriched experience as you should, or maybe that type of research isn't valued enough. And I get enough from that involvement as I do from making my own work, if not more. So,
Yeah, talk about not having enough time to do, this job or what's expected of this job. I mean, if you think about really what being a curator is, to really do it right or do it, if we had unlimited resources and time and all that, ideally you want to start really with like a studio visit, and you want to spend some time with that artist, and you want to spend some time understanding what their kind of references are as far as what they're studying, what their research base is, so that you as a curator can interpret that and pair it or stage it or show it. And I mean, that's our job. And curator, it comes from the word, curate. The base of it is a Latin word that means to care, to take care of. And in the last 10, 15 years, that word, people talk about curating cheese plates and things like that. And I think that there's some normalizing of that word and that title, but ultimately what we're talking about is to care for these objects, for these ideas, and I think that's where that pressure is. There's a lot of expectation for us to deliver on that part of things, but really to do that so appropriately or to its fullest extent, you really need a lot more time, a lot more resources, money, time, staff, etc., to be able to kind of explore these ideas. So a lot of what, at least speaking for myself, that it's based on instinct. You know, we kind of can do a lot with websites and internet and personally Instagram to do, you know, to try to get a sense of what this artist is working on, what they're doing, the ideas, and then draw some of our own conclusions from that. So there's, you know, a lot of limitations, but it just kind of changes the way you have to operate. So, you know, it's both good and bad. You know, what I love, you know, to be able to travel to New York to see this artist studio, to be able to have a conversation and meet other curators and see other galleries and do that space, and, you know, our professional development, of course, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Sometimes we have to fast track those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, curiocutare, is that the Latin word, curiocutare, something like that? It means to care for, to worry about, really, in a way.
That was a good question, by the way.
Good question. I'm wondering, I'm thinking my question too large. I'm going to make it a really simple question, and that given the climate, political climate in the United States or in the southern region of the United States, maybe, how much do you feel like are you constrained in a sense, like, by what you can and cannot? Like, obviously, in your hall, you can't have things, right? And in your university, you know, I mean, because, I mean, you're out there, certain constraints that are obvious, but I'm just sort of wondering how you feel about what can I show, you know, or do I self-censor in certain ways as to, I'm an art historian, you know, what tends towards political art, but not politically in terms of posters and things like that, but really sort of experimental art practice, how it intersects. So I ask this question because I think about what can and can't be shown, where, and then, and you know, like in a way, dealing with various communities, you know, it's a complicated kind of process that you have to go through. I just wondered if you want to comment about that. I'm not trying to make a comment for you.
I just opened an exhibit today in one of my spaces, and it's 2 different bodies of work created by 3 different artists, and one of those bodies of work are abstract photographs of monuments, not only in the South, but on the eastern coastline, and it scares me.
How far in advance did you plan that show? That's amazing.
Last year. So there are some buttons that I can push, and I would emphasize that as long as it doesn't make it up the chain and get too much noise, then I'm fine. But if it does strike someone's interest and they write a very large piece on it and then people start talking, that's where, that's where the potential conflict really lies, because we want our students to be aware of these issues and to be exposed to these progressive forms of artwork, because they're incredibly relevant. But we don't want to upset anyone either.
It's important to see some of the restrictions as challenges, but challenges to educate, not really challenges
Right.
to be the next bad boy curator or whatever, but to, you know, see that as a chance to educate and use those restrictions as an advantageous tool. I know it probably sounds difficult, and it is, but there's ways to navigate that world as well.
Yeah, and it's something I think about a lot, actually. I moved from Nashville to Bowling Green in 2005, and coming out of Nashville, there had been like 3 issues of censorship in a row. And I can't remember exactly what they were, but at the time they involved nudity. And I was working at the Parthenon, and we were like, oh God, I hope nobody comes to look to the outside of our building, because there's naked people on the outside over here. But, you know, it's like, so it's what people notice and what they care about. And then I moved to WKU, and the students were a part of the interview process, which I totally appreciated, and they had just had what they felt like was an administrative censorship of their work. And so I was leaving one situation going into another, and I said, look, I don't believe in censoring. I do believe in making relationships. And so we need to figure out, you know, if you have something you want to show, maybe right here in front of the glass window is not the best place for it. So like, we'll figure this out. I believe in conversation. I believe in building relationships. Then, right before I got to WKU, there was a vagina plate controversy, because Judy Chicago had been a visiting artist on campus, and then students were making work that looked like Judy Chicago's, and the president was called by angry donors, and it's like, well, but Judy Chicago makes vagina plates. Like, why are you surprised by this? And so that sort of calmed down. That was not my fault, but I rolled into it, and then I was like, oh my, do you guys know Libby Rowe? She's an artist who was at Vanderbilt. She's now in Texas, and so this show was on the books. I got there, and I was like, damn it, Libby. She had a 7-foot vagina sleeping bag. And so I was like, oh God, so I just like told these students I'm not going to censor anything, and I'm going to stand up for them and stand up for art, and now I'm like, you can't not see this thing. And our entire wall is glass windows. So it's a sliding glass door window thing. So I was like, okay, what are we going to do? So the first thing I did was I sort of read everything. I figured out what I wanted to do. I went to my department head, and I went to the dean, and I said, thinking, sort of being the diplomat, like, nobody likes surprises, but I'm not going to pull this thing. And so I said, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to show it. We're going to put it, sort of tuck it under here behind the stairs. We're going to close the glass doors. Luckily, we have a wooden swinging door. We're going to put a notice on the door that says, danger, vagina sleeping bag, whatever. I can't remember what it said, but, we like took the
Enter at your own risk.
Yes. Took like the text from what movies say. And of course, what did it do? People were like, oh boy, here's something exciting to see. So it kind of, people who broke that, glass door or whatever, chose by walking through, they took it on themselves at what they were going to see. And so it was fine. And the other thing I talking about teaching, I said, we're going to make, how do we make something seem innocuous? We have a panel discussion about it, yay! So I'm like, I'm just going to bore everybody into submission about this, about feminism and art and voice and giant, yeah. So it kind of worked, I think. I mean, in terms of, there were definitely people who were sort of worried about it. And so the things that end up being issues are never the things you think are going to be issues. The issue I had the next year was Sigma Chi wanted to have a reception with alcohol in the gallery, because we're one of 3 places on campus you're allowed to have alcohol. And I said, I don't want the Sigma Chi alumni dudes, I think it was Sigma Chi, in the gallery. This seems like a bad idea. Plus, have you seen the work in here? It was a little, sort of edgy. Well, of course, the president was a Sigma Chi, so it went past me, and I had to have. So I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do is, because my issue is I'm protecting the art. I don't want drunk frat boys, sorry, in this space with red wine or beer. And so I was like, okay, I'll be a gallery docent. I'm going to just show up and I'm going to educate them. And it was actually kind of awesome, because all these guys were there, and they're looking at the art, and they'd see something look like a penis, and they're like, ah, da, da, da. And so then I would come over and talk to them about it, and then they would blush and run away. So I mean, education, boring people into submission, shame, all the tools at your disposal.
I'm taking notes.
I do have to say, I would be remiss in not saying it. I did go viral on Fox News. I think it was 2012. If you are part of the population, you knew all about it. If you're a population that, like my parents, that you know nothing about it, and that wasn't something I pulled into the gallery, that was a student work. And it literally went national. And I'm really glad that happened in 2012 and not now, because I feel like now it would be physically much more dangerous for myself, my student, my colleagues. Then we were still told not to sleep in our house that weekend, because of, I said, has anybody specifically threatened my life? And they said, nobody specifically threatened your life? But so this is real, you're asking, this is not something, we tangled with the right to life folks, basically. And so by accident, by complete, we thought we were minding our own business and we weren't.
Well, you were, but they weren't.
Well, actually, we weren't really. I mean,
Depends on how you swing it.
I was teaching installation art, and the Hilltoppers for Life put 4,000 popsicle stick crosses up in front of our windows, and the only way our building is built on the old football field, which is every artist's dream, right? That you get the old football field to build your art school, but it means there's an empty amphitheater facing our building, and the only windows are on the 4th floor, which is the art floor. So there's no other floor could look out and see the 4,000 crosses except us. Plus, I mean, like, we had to walk through them for a week, so everybody was kind of pissed.
Yeah.
So a student interacted with it, but not in a destructive way.
Yes.
I'm just curious, the both, artist and curator, and this is probably a really jerky thing to ask on the spot, but like, what's the best thing about being both, and what's the worst thing about being both?
The best thing is being inspired by what you see. The worst thing is not having time to do it.
Oh.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
That's like the best answer.
Yeah. The best thing is, it's both the best and the worst thing for me, is my art side wanting to manipulate the artwork in how it's presented or how it's sequenced in the gallery. I love that part of my job, but it's also really tempting to, and sometimes I think I even accidentally cross that line where I've manipulated too much the presentation of it or something and changed or affected the artwork. So, you know, it's both the best and the worst thing for me.
Well, and as an artist, I can respect intent, and so I want to make sure things are presented the way they're intended, and their message is presented in that fashion, but then also somehow figure out how to incorporate it into like a group presentation with a theme. So having that artist's voice is very important, and I think that's something that maybe someone that's not an artist doesn't quite understand all of the time.
Again, on the way down, I was thinking about the label curator, and I was thinking, gosh, that sounds fancier than what I feel like I do. And my title is director, and I was thinking, I'm a director, I'm not a curator, and it's not a hierarchical thing at all. It's like, I feel like what I do is I try and facilitate others' voices, whether that's, and again, I don't have the time to curate my own shows. I feel like if I were coming up with a theme and coming up with elements that exhibit, you know, kind of my argument, my thesis, like that's curating. What I do is bring stuff in for other people to look at in a rotation that supports all of our areas, plus work with other curators. I have faculty, we have in our department who have curated some really nice exhibitions, and I help facilitate that. Like, okay, what does it take to get art here from another country? But yeah, I think I would love to do more curation, legit, but then again, it's time in a day. Like, that's more, I feel like, a creative practice than just kind of the management side of it, which is what I do. And then the curatorial side of it comes when you have all this stuff in there and you have to tell a story with it. And tell a story with it is wrong. You have to make the work look the best that it can in that space with artist intent in mind.
In terms of, I don't know, the most positive thing that comes out of my job, it really surrounds the students. The reason I got into the job that I'm in now, and even directory work or gallery work period, was from my studio art background. I wanted to know that process of displaying my work and what happens when it leaves my studio and becomes observed by the viewer. And sharing that with students and walking them through exhibitions and kind of giving them this perspective that even though it's inside of their bubble, gives them hope, appreciation, and understanding that this is a possible job for you, this is applicable. It's just a matter of thinking things through, not just in terms of finalizing your composition or your sculptural work, but how does that exist outside of your studio? In terms of the most challenging thing, it's definitely time, not only for my own artistic practice, but the creativity level. I get so drained by switching directions, so constantly from teaching different classes in one semester, running through the exhibition schedules in multiple gallery spaces, that my brain is so spent from moving in all of these different directions that I can't focus enough until the summer comes to be able to really sit down and synthesize what it is I want to say with my work and then move forward with production.
linking maybe your question and, I don't know, students, I can't, but you asked what parts of the practices come together, maybe. And one of the, like, most fun things, most productive, I feel like has been the gallery studies class, and I've partnered with our museum on campus. And so I have students do mini curatorial projects. When I say mini, we get, here's the hallway, and you've got 10 square feet of space, and you can work with the museum and the Library Special Collections and find a research topic, find artifacts that support that. Worked with the preparator, worked with their registrar, collections curator, basically to get their hands on stuff, tell the story, and then go all the way through the process of making mounts and mounting it on the wall, and because there's a magic to it, which I also call chemistry magic, but sort of this like, or alchemy, it's this process where it becomes, through a set of steps, it transforms into something that you couldn't know at the end. And that's the putting the work on the wall, even if it's, you've done it a million times and it's just paintings and frames, the easiest thing to put up, and you put them on the wall and it changes. And so walking students through that step, from having students hang their own work to having students curate these other exhibitions is transformative, I think. And I love teaching, and I love, stuff, and I love making. So I think that that kind of brings it all together in a way.
I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. Does anybody have a final? I've got one, but I'll withhold it and somebody else has one. All right, well, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So we've been talking about a lot of serious things, or kind of, most of the series. But I want to kind of switch it into maybe something a little bit lighthearted. So would each of you just relay a story about either a show or process and interaction? It could be something funny, it could be something rewarding, it could be something heartfelt or just infuriating. But like, is there like one kind of story that kind of pops into your head about your curating experience, or a show that you had to deal with, or an artist or something that you could share with us?
I think this is where my art hat and my gallery director hat clash, because I can be that artist too, that shows up and you're like, oh, my work literally is made out of glass, but I remember working with artists, and this one, I knew she did installation work. Our gallery doesn't even have a ceiling, so it's like, okay, you can't hang things from the ceiling, you can't, all of the steps, this is what it looks like, this is what you can do. So she shows up and she's looking, she's like, oh, I told you we don't have a ceiling. She's like, but I want to hang all these things, and she's like, oh, well, can't we just get a cherry picker in here? And I was like, we don't even have an elevator. We do, but not one that's going to fit a cherry picker. So it's just and then I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, I remember the time when I brought, there were cast glass objects that hang from strings, and I brought them to the registrar, and I was like, oh, I don't care if bits break off them, it's okay. And she almost peed on the floor. She's like, you can't do that. Is that okay? So it's like that. Yeah, that balance. I get it, but it also frustrates me.
That was a good one. As a curatorial story, it's kind of funny. I was working with a colleague of mine, a fellow artist that I often work on projects with, both in studio and in gallery. And we put together an all-video show called Cinema Killed the Video Star. And, of course, it's a play on the song Video Killed the Radio Star. And so, anyway, the funny part was, these artists are just going to send us their video files, and then we're just going to plug them into a computer or put them on a TV monitor, and it's just going to work, right? Because it's technology, right? You just press play, and it plays. Well, it was the most infuriating thing, and I never knew that there were so many different formats of video and audio that could all clash, and none of it work, and one day it works and the next day it doesn't. It was just, what? Don't even understand. As a millennial that grew up with all this technology in front of me, it's just, you think plug it in and press play, and it didn't work. Nothing worked. So dealing with technology as the gallery director, and of course artists saying, here's my file, and you're like, oh yeah, sure, it works, right? Preview, it works, and then it comes hours before the opening, literally minutes before the opening, you're scrambling to get the right format for everything to work. It's really fun.
So mine's not a funny story, it's more of a sweet story. One of the spots at the Guild exhibition is for a Murray State student to have an exhibit there. And it's typically, it's an award, and so the award comes with the opportunity to exhibit, so it's usually a junior or senior. And recently, Anna Soul had her exhibit there, and she just had the reception last Friday, and Saturday she came in and just spoke about how much that meant to her to have the opportunity to exhibit outside of the academic situation, and then also realizing that that gave her what she needed to get finished with school. But she said that having that opportunity helped her realize what the possibilities of being an artist after school meant. So that's my sweet story.
That's an important story.
You want to go? Well, I was taken aback this past year when someone who absolutely did not have to do this, it was just a random visitor who came through my space, was very moved by the exhibition that was in our summer programming, and literally wrote me a letter and mailed it to me, even though she was on campus when she wrote it. Just thanking me for having brought that work in, expressing how moved she was by it, that she was hoping to meet me the next time she was in town. And you know, that stuff like that is just so rewarding and reminds me of why it is that I do what I do. That it just means the world.
I'm going to pick a story happened just recently, but it happens all the time actually. So you get the artwork, and as facilitators for this artwork, we treat it so delicately with our gloves and everything. And when the artist comes in, after you've explained all of this process and very specific nature of handling the artwork, and you're going through that with either a special topics class on museum studies or just your gallery workers that are work study students, and then the artist appears and rolls it all out on the dirty floor and shuffles all the papers around, and you're like, just don't do what he does. Don't do what she does. They're just the artist. But yeah, just noticing how different when you teach people what's going on versus when an artist shows up. Because I'll handle my artwork in a very different way than what I would handle artwork that comes into the gallery. And so it's like this stuff. It's just objects. You're moving it around when you're making it. You're shuffling the paintings around. You're building the sculptures, but then we're not allowed to touch it later, and you're being very delicate. But then when the artist shows up and they're just tossing it around, and you're trying to tell, no, students, please, that's not how we're going to do this. In the next show, please don't take this as an example. So yeah, that happens a lot. So, and that's a reoccurring, fun thing that happens.
I think also those are the artists that, if, they handle their artwork that way, but they also look at you and they're like, expect you to put the white gloves on.
Yeah, that is true. Like if you start to follow suit with that, all of a sudden, no. Slap on the wrist. Oh, sorry, I was just following the suit with what you do. That has happened. Some of them, it's just my stuff. It's okay. But there are times when an artist will move their stuff very haphazardly, and then so you're like, okay, well, this is how we're going to do this, and you get on board, and then they're like, no.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank all five of you for coming and participating. And
Todd, thank you. The show looks
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
well,
Thank you so
very
much.
welcome. I'm super thrilled, excited that this happened. I mean, this is, I'll be honest, I don't know, other than that original question of I don't know that I've ever had this kind of grouping together of like-minded folks that talk about this. They just kind of came to me one day. I thought, we need to get together and talk about this. So
We should expand it into a conference sometime.
Yeah.
We can apply for those things.
We've talked about that, we just haven't ever actually followed through.
So,
Particularly now, I'm just like end with a charge. Like we all need to be vigilant and active, but I think we do that best by making. Like our presence is our presence, and make cool stuff and get it out there and encourage other people to do it, and the fact that we're here means that whatever the governor says, like, we're still here.
And thanks for everyone for coming tonight, and everyone out there in the ether.
TV land.